folks, to our podcast, Therapy on a Tangent. I'm Zori with my co-host, Natalie. Say hi, Natalie.
Hi, everyone.
And this is a podcast where two therapists nerd out about our geeky passions and mental health. So, Natalie, before we get into the episode, what have you been nerding out about?
So, I feel like sometimes I go backwards in time, and I've picked up sewing. um,
Ooh.
so, for those of you who don't know, Joanne Fabrics is going out of business, and so they are just selling things. Sales are not great. I understand why they're going out of business, because even like they're going out of business, sale is not that great. But I have like all these fabrics, and I bought like a bunch of yarn, and I bought a sewing machine. So I've been like really invested in just doing like sewing and crocheting, and I've never used a sewing machine in my life. So this is like the first time I'm actually like getting invested, and I'm like trying to go through like YouTube videos and things like that, just learning how to sew and how to use like a sewing machine, because I swear a sewing machine, I don't know what it is. It's like it just magically sews. I don't understand how it works, but somehow things get sewn and they stay together. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit more that goes into it than just like, woo, shirt. Unlike things like Stardew Valley, where you can just put anything together and whoosh, sure. But no, that's totally cool. Do you have like a project that you're really looking forward to?
Well, the easiest things to put together right now are blankets. So I have like
Okay.
soft, like these really soft fabrics. I'm a sucker for like really soft things. So I
Hmm.
have the most basic thing is I'm trying to figure out how to sew like a nice blanket together. Apparently, is more complicated than I thought, because I thought you just cut out a square and things like that, but then you have to like tuck in the corners. You gotta make things all nice when you sew it together. So that's what I'm working on. But the more ambitious thing is like I'm trying to make cat toys. So I used to make cat toys for my cats like by hand because I know how to hand sew. And
Hmm.
it's always cheaper than buying cat toys because they're so expensive for no reason. So,
I know. And then you buy them and then they don't play with them.
right, exactly. So at least this way, if I like make a toy and they don't play with it, it's fine. I didn't spend that much money on it. But yeah, the goal is to be able to make like cool cat toys and stuff. Maybe even like a cat bed. So we'll see. We'll see how ambitious I get with all this. I also have yarn, and I still have no idea what I'm doing with the yarn.
Okay. Okay. Well, listeners, you heard it here first. So whenever Natalie does make this like cat toy, I'll make sure to bully her with love to send me pictures so I can post on the socials for y'all.
Yeah. Well, what about you, Zori? What have you been geeking out on?
So honestly, this part of the semester is like super busy. It's the getting closer towards the end of spring break. So my students are tired, I'm tired. So I haven't really had that much time to um, do things like play new games or stuff like that. And so if I'm gonna watch something, I want something to be low key. I want it to be not really complex. So I've been kind of falling back on watching like children's movies. The most recent one being the third Sonic movie. I watched the first two. I mean, to be fair, I watched the first two. I really like the first. I really like the second one. And the third one, I liked it too. Jim Carrey, right? As Dr. Robotnik is hilarious. And I just want him and his sidekick henchman, I forgot his name, to just kiss because they're so queer coded. But yeah, so I guess like that's been the most recent thing. I do like Sonic. When I was younger, I actually played a lot of Sonic video games with my cousin, who I called Boo. Uh, don't ask me why I call him Boo. That's just the nickname that was his, and it stuck. And it's always funny when I watch anything Sonic related and I see Tails, and I'm reminded that Tails is technically a boy.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember distinctly having a fight with my cousin, and I think even like one of his friends one time when I was younger, that Tails was a girl. And I was like, oh, nope, nope. Now, as an adult, I'm like, Tails is a boy. So I would not be surprised if there's fan fiction out there about like Tails being like trans or something like that, or non-binary or gender expensive. But
Mm.
yeah, there's always just moments where I'm just like, oh yeah, Tails is a boy. But anyway, at the end of Sonic 3, spoilers if you haven't seen it, though, where have you been if you call yourself a Sonic fan? Amy showed up, and Loki, Amy is like also one of my favorites from the Sonic universes. So if you don't know, Amy, she has like this big mallet, and I don't know. For some reason, I like characters that have big mallets. Don't ask me why.
I think it's a power symbol, and I think you like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. Um, Speaking of power symbols, it is Aries season at during the time of this recording, and for those of you who don't know, Aries is the start of the astrological new year. So this is the real new year. But anyway, speaking of horoscopes and stuff like that, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today, Natalie, was how do we see horoscopes and also things like tarot cards and things along that, things that people sometimes think are like woo woo or like cons or magic or whatever you think about astrology and that type of stuff. How do we see it play in the therapy room and also like as therapists? And as therapists who are called to be like culturally competent and also called to kind of allow the client, when appropriate, and to kind of lead the session, how do we implement that into our training to be something useful for our client, whether or not we believe in it or agree with it or not? How can we still use something like that to be helpful? So, but before we go into that, I thought it would just be fun to kind of ask you, Natalie, do you know what your sign is?
So I'm not hugely into astrology, so all I know is that I'm an Aquarius.
Okay, okay. So Aquarius. So let's see what we have here. So this is, I'm going to look at two sites. So one is Nebula, and Nebula says that Aquarius, their strengths are being innovative, creative, original, progressive, and then their weaknesses are being resistant to change, disconnected, stubborn, or aloof.
Mm.
Any of them, any of those resonate with you, Natalie?
I do think most of it resonates. I think a lot of it is spot on. I don't know if I want to say I'm aloof, though. I don't think that quite fits me very well, but I think the other stuff feels like it resonates with me.
Okay, and that's fair. And again, I'm not saying that any of this is true. I'm not saying that like all Aquarius is like this, but I think for the topic that we're going to have today, it'll be helpful to know what each of ours. So mine, according to Nebula, as an Aries, I was born March 31st. Whoop, whoop. My strengths are being energetic, enthusiastic, determined, passionate, confident. But then my weaknesses are impulsive, stubborn, intense, hot-tempered, and self-censored. And that might be true, especially the weaknesses. But again, I don't, for me personally, I don't think that we should put all of who we are, how we see ourselves, and how we see others into these things, especially because these are what we call the sun signs. And, for those of you who are new to astrology or don't really keep up, there's a lot of different signs that you can have. It's not just your sun sign or the sign that people typically ask when they ask you, like, what your signs are. There are other signs as well. And typically, for the astrology girlies out there, we know that typically we ask, like, what is your sun sign? What is your moon sign? And what is your rising sign? And sun signs are essentially like what is viewed as determining your egos, your identity, and your role in life. But then we have moon signs, which are kind of what rules your emotions, your moods, and feelings. And this is kind of how you most think of yourself and kind of reflects your personality, like when you're alone. And then the rising or ascendant sign is basically the mask. Like, how do you present yourself in person? So, I just read about the Aries, being impulsive, stubborn, intense, energetic, enthusiastic. But according to my rising sign, which is Capricorn, I kind of come off as very serious. I definitely think, just like with everything, like in certain settings, I may be some serious, in certain settings, I may be not so serious, but it's always just fun to think about that as well. And I'm not going to make you figure out your rising and moon sign as well, because that's just going to take up sign. But when these conversations or when my clients do bring up, their horoscopes, it's it's really interesting to like see kind of what they think or and how those things apply to them, because I've had clients where they're like, yeah, I'm an Aries sun. And in the back of my head, I'm like, yeah, I'm an Aries sun too. But how we are Aries is like vastly different. And for my fellow Aries out there, yes, sometimes it could be because they're April Aries versus March Aries, but also it's about interpretation. And that's kind of where I want to talk to you today about with these things like horoscopes and tarot cards and stuff like that. Interpretation. How do we make meanings from things and how do we like self-reflect? Because everyone has their own thoughts about these things, but how I like to view these things as being opportunities of self-reflection. Like, okay, you think of these things about yourself. How do you see those things playing out? And, how can we improve in those things? So, Natalie, have you ever had a client who wanted to talk to you about horoscopes or tarot cards or anything like that?
So I have quite a few clients that do talk a lot about like their signs and what it means to them. And how it comes up a lot is usually they're talking about something that happened or their reaction to something or how they felt about something, and then it's attached to, oh, it's because I'm this, like it's because of my Capricorn or because I'm an Aries and things like that. And it's always interesting when it comes up because I think it helps clients think about themselves, like conceptualize themselves in a way that feels like complex but neatly complex at the same time. Like it's already packaged for you to try to like understand, but it's still like a very complex identity. So I think it's cool to even hear like, oh, well, how does that relate to like what does your
Hmm.
sign say about how you reacted and things like that. And then I think it does make my clients stop and think about like, what part of their personality or what aspects of themselves cause them to react or behave in a certain way. And then there's a lot more deeper thought that goes into it too about like, well, what things can we do differently, or what feels like it's just inherently a part of you and that's what's difficult to change. So I think that's where it becomes such an interesting conversation where it's like this is the box of complicated things that I feel a part of, but then this is also like the stuff that I really resonate with and then the stuff that I resonate with a little less.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's totally spot on. And it's funny because I think back to sometimes my students when they have clients who want to talk about their horoscopes, they kind of just like, oh my gosh, all my client wants to do is talk about their horoscope. And like, I've had conversations with students where depending on the client, they may be viewing the horoscope or talking about their horoscopes, may be providing some sort of thing. But one thing that I kind of pose for my students is, if a client was talking about religion or religious practices or spiritual practices, we wouldn't necessarily be like, okay, or we shouldn't, I should say, we shouldn't just be like, okay, whatever. We would take that seriously, right? We would, be curious about that, curious about like how that plays a role in terms of how the client views their values and their goals and their place in life, just like that. And I think the same can be true for horoscopes as well. Again, whether or not the client necessarily views it as part of their religion or spirituality, I think it still kind of has the same role where you can ask like, okay, how does this align with your values? And we may have a client who they have like, let's just say Aries sun sign, and they're just like, I don't feel like I am passionate or confident. And depending on the client, depending on what's going on in their life and they're presenting problems, that could be something that we explore. Like, okay, so you don't resonate with those traits. Are there any traits that you do resonate with, or what would it look like for you to be passionate about something, to like it, or to be confident about something, or what does passion or confident? How do you define those things? Because how I may be thinking about confidence as an Aries, may be vastly different from how another Aries, quote unquote, thinks about confidence as well. One of the stereotypes about Aries are like we're really hot-headed. And maybe that's true for me. Maybe that not. I plead the fifth. But, if that's how a person is thinking about confidence, for example, then yeah, maybe they don't resonate with confidence. But if we're just thinking about like confidence, like what is like the ability to do something and feel like you do it well, is there anything that you feel like that is happening in your life, big or small? And that could be like a really interesting conversation to have again,
Mm-hmm.
even when the horoscope traits don't really match to our clients, or our
Mm-hmm.
clients don't feel like they match to the horoscope traits as well.
Yeah, I do wonder if, in some ways, the horoscope traits help people think about like the idealized versions of themselves. Like, this is what my horoscope
Mm,
says about me, and I want to embody these things. So, what can I do to embody them? So, I could see how that's really helpful for people, especially as they're trying to navigate figuring out like who they are, like even like what kind of self growth they want to do as a person. I think
mhm,
it helps guide them in a way like, oh, these are some really great strengths that I have as this horoscope sign. And so, like, how do I try to incorporate a little bit of that more in my life? Versus, I could also see where, like, some of those weaknesses, I think that helps clients be more introspective of, like, oh, I really resonate with this and I really see this and I wish to be different. And then so I think it helps bring people's awareness to like these different traits of themselves, and it helps them build
mhm.
this idealized self in a way and figure out like what kind of traits do I want to work on, and bring awareness to like what could I do better so that I can become a better version of myself.
Yeah, like for instance, like going back to what we said was one of the Aquarius weakness, aloof, and you were like, I don't feel like I'm aloof. Again, just thinking about like what does that look like? And sure, if you don't feel like you're aloof, that's great. But then I think it's also helpful to think about like, okay, so how do I know when I am being aloof then? Like what does that look like? So then that if that does happen, I can make sure that like I catch myself in that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we ideally don't want to be aloof and stuff like that.
Right.
And just like for myself, how can I catch myself when I'm being hot-tempered or impulsive? And I think that those are like valid conversations to have with clients as well.
Mm-hmm. And
Um,
you know, now that you met,
mhm,
and I'm reflecting on it, I do think like there are times in my life where I've been aloof. I think I'm thinking mostly of like my adolescent years, where I'm pretty sure I was aloof a lot just because it was a life stage thing and where I was at. But I think that was just part of like what felt comfortable for me to be kind of aloof. And
mhm,
and then I started seeing how that was not helpful for some of the things that I want to do in life and the way that I want to relate with people. And so like that was something that I naturally had worked on, because like even though it was comfortable, it wasn't like meeting my goals of like trying to like have certain types of friends or do
mhm,
things with people that I wanted to do and things like that. So I had to really work on that in order for me to
mhm.
not be like that. So I could see how like maybe different points in time we have like the strengths and weaknesses that we see in like our horoscope traits.
Yeah, and I really like how you brought up adolescence because and again, I don't it's not like at least as far as I know, it's not like there's a survey or anything that like actual data. But I that does bring like the people who I do, at least in my professional work, correct me if I'm wrong, they are like people either around our age, like millennials, or sometimes Gen Z as well, they'll talk about. And like when you think about it that way, think about it like as, these are developmentally times of our lives where we're trying to figure out who we are as individuals, who we are in terms of other relationships. I'm definitely thinking about these horoscopes, especially since horoscopes do have like sometimes like, oh, Aries should be paired up with so and so. I think I should avoid Scorpios. I think, I don't know, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, but apparently Aries and Leos, we're good. Aries and Aries sometimes, it depends. But yeah, I think even like looking at it like that, like when people are just like, what's your sign? What's the sign of your partner or your friend or something like that? Again, thinking about like supposedly what do those signs mean? What are some things that those signs may do really well together, and what are some things that those signs are supposedly not so great about? And having that conversation with like friends or family, like, hey, if like our signs are known to supposedly not be able to communicate, how can we make sure that we are communicating in a way that's helpful for both of us and feels like both of us are being heard? Again, you don't have to put a lot of stock into these horoscopes, but I feel like they're like a cute little talking points, sometimes that you can have with like friends or partners as well. And in terms of talking about some of these discussions that may feel not that common or not that easy to have, this could be like a nice little way to like have those conversations.
Yeah, and I could see this as a nice way to introduce yourself too, because I think a lot of people have like a general idea of like their horoscopes and things like that. So I think that's a gentle way of like talking a little bit more about yourself and then asking the other person to talk more about themselves too. Because I think sometimes it's really awkward to get to know somebody and just be like, oh, what's your personality like? Even though I think that's the question we're all wondering when we meet
Mhm.
people for the first time, we want to make sure our personalities match. And so I think like asking about somebody's horoscope helps with that because then it's like, oh, well, I can see that like in your personality, you probably have these traits, or like these are some of the things that they say about your sign. And I think that's what helps people figure out like, do we think we're going to mesh as people, as friends, or whatever other type of relationships we have? And yeah, I think it's a nice way of like relating with people too because it's also something that like it's fun and it's not like a heavy topic even though like it goes into some of these like heavier topics.
Yeah, and again, you shouldn't just stop at the conversation like, what's your sign? Oh, you're Aquarius. And then where if you're going to like use horoscopes as a tool to communicate about different personalities and how you approach things, you know, take it a step further and talk about like, what does that mean for you? Or how does it look like to be Aquarius for you, Natalie? And how does it look like to be an Aries for me? Do we align with those things? Do we not align with those traits and stuff like that? While you were talking, Natalie, I pulled up Aries and Aquarius compatibility. And according to one of the things, it says, apparently we do pair well. So yay.
No surprise.
We don't have to podcast. We don't have to end the podcast. Apparently, we're both adventurous, intelligent, and innovative. Though sometimes we may face challenges due to our contrasting temperaments, which I can definitely see. And we definitely have moments. But again, it's about communication. I think if we were just to stop at like, okay, yeah, Aries and Aquarius get along moving forward. But I think it's about like, okay, like what does that look like? What does it look like that we are both very intellectual? What does it look like that we're both independent? That may be for us being like, hey, you don't have to do all the editing, Natalie, by yourself. Like if you need me to do some editing, I can do that. Or like, though this probably wouldn't happen, but like, sorry, you don't need to do all the social media. I can do.
I know where my weaknesses are,
Um,
Zori.
for our listeners who don't know as well, Natalie will avoid anything social media as much as possible. It's okay. I still love her. But yeah, so like yeah, I think it's we can still use horoscopes. We when clients bring up talks about horoscopes and stuff like that, that isn't something that we should just be like, okay, roll our eyes, let's move forward. But it could be a way that we can incorporate that. And honestly, you don't even necessarily need to know a lot about horoscopes. I'm gonna be honest, unless you're Aries, I don't know nothing about no one else. I kind of know something about Capricorn because my mom's a Capricorn, but like other than that, like I don't know nothing about any of the others. I may know like they're like if it's like a earth sign or water sign or fire sign or air sign like that, but other than that, sometimes I don't know. Another thing that sometimes comes up that's like in the realm of horoscopes, astrology, and stuff like that is tarot cards. And for those of you who don't know, or they're basically like a playing deck. Honestly, if you really are down to it, I think you can potentially use like a plain deck. It won't have all the cards, but the idea with tarot cards, or sometimes when people think of tarot cards, they think of like, oh, this is like fortune telling or stuff like that, with the glass ball, like tell me my future, like the cards are supposed to tell you your future. And there are some people who believe that, but again, when I think of tarot cards, I think of it as another way that to be self-reflective. Because one way that a lot of people think of tarot cards is, what meaning are you bringing out from them? The idea is if you're a tarot card user, you pick a deck. There's so many decks out there, and you pick a deck that resonates with you. And yes, there are some original meanings to each of the cards within the deck, but ideally, the more you play around with the tarot cards, the more you look at the tarot cards, you kind of find your own meaning that may align directly or, may align parallel somewhat to the original meanings. But in the end, it's kind of about your own meaning making of the cards and trying to get correct in terms of remembering everything that the cards are about. And I've definitely had some clients who are interested in tarot. So again, Natalie, what has been your experience like with tarot cards? Have you had clients who are interested in tarot?
So I've had less experience with clients who are interested in tarot. I haven't really had any clients bring it up in session, but I think the concept itself is very interesting for me. Like I've definitely seen how it's portrayed in like TV shows and things like that. I haven't had a whole lot of like direct interaction with it, but I do think like the cards in itself is very interesting in the way that it's being interpreted by people and how people make meaning out of it. As like a therapist, I'm in some ways like very old school. So a lot of things I think about is like people's unconscious, what are people projecting onto things. And I think tarot cards is one of those things where people are definitely projecting their own stuff onto there. And then that's part of what their interpretations are. And so I think that's a very interesting window. If used in therapy, it's an interesting window into somebody's like inner psyche. What are they thinking about? What's in their unconscious or conscious mind? How do symbols play out in the way that they think about things? So I think conceptually, I think it's really cool and would had some great application in therapy. It just hasn't come up a lot with my clients.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely agree with you, everything that you said about it conceptually. And I think it actually aligns with our therapeutic orientation. So again, for those of you who don't know the Natalie and Zori lore, we both went to the same master's program. We were in the same cohort, and our program there's the theory that our program kind of had us practice from, though we learned about all different types of counseling theories. It's called psychodynamic. And I won't go into the nitty-gritty details, but basically it's about how to make the unconscious, so like things that we're not even aware of in terms of our relationships and ourselves and how we view and think about things, how do we make that conscious? So we are aware about that. And so we are aware of how that does impact our relationships and our sense of self and how we navigate the world. Again, it's kind of an offshoot of Freud's psychoanalysis, which again won't go too much into it about it. But one of the things that Freud is well known for is like his dream analysis. You know, it's not just that you had this nightmare. It's like, what does this nightmare mean? Like, dreams are hardly ever, according to Freud, hardly ever like literal, but they have meaning behind it. And I think tarot cards, you can also do that as well without the scarring of a nightmare. I don't know about you, Natalie, but I always have like zombie nightmares. I don't know why, but I think tarot cards can, kind of give the same thing, but without having to go to sleep or without having to
Mm.
like have a dream diary right next to you. So I think if you are going to, if we're thinking about like tarot cards in terms of potentially like using them or not even using them, but just talking to clients about them, sometimes it's helpful just to have an idea. So like one of the cards in a tarot deck is part of what's called like the major arcana. There's major arcana and minor arcana. The major, basically they have like specific names, specific themes, stuff like that. There's more details about that, but and then there's a minor arcana that kind of more aligns with like what people think of as like a typical deck of cards. So there's four suits, I guess you could call them, and of those suits, there's like the numbers, but then there's like the queen of whatever suit. So it could be the queen of wands, the queen of cups, the queen of pentacles, or the coins, or the queen of swords. And the same thing with like the king, the page, and I believe there's like ace. I should have looked at my cards before talking about this, but yes. But like one of the cards that like I feel like especially like people get like a little woo woo about is like the death card.
Mm.
And like when people, I feel like in general, when people think of the death, they're like, oh no, bad. But the general OG kind of meaning of death in terms of tarot card, and it depends on how the card lies. So one thing also that comes up with tarot cards is if it's upright or reversed, so upside
Mm.
down. So if the death card is upright, it talks about endings and change and transformations and transition. So it's not just all doom and gloom. Sometimes endings can be good, transformations can be good, and stuff like that. Or when it's reverse, it can talks about resistance to change, personal transformation, or inner purging. Again, not necessarily bad or good either way, whether it's upright or down, but like even though hearing those things, hearing those like keywords about the death card, whether it's upright or reversed, you could still have a conversation with the client about like what comes to mind, or like what things that are happening in your life right now that comes to mind when you hear any of those keywords. Do any of those keywords stick out to you? And you can do it that way. But then also, one thing that some tarot card users, they don't sometimes they don't even really memorize all of the OG or like the original meanings of the cards. Sometimes they put meanings to the cards themselves. And that's part of the reason why it's good to have a card deck that is your own and that you like, so that you can kind of do that free association, kind of like with the what's it called, Rorschach images, like those black and white, like do you see a clown or do you see a
Mm-hmm.
bunny type of thing. And depending on your cards, it may, some of them are pretty literal looking and some of them are pretty abstract. I do have a tarot deck, and one of my favorite cards, actually my favorite card deck to use, is like a flower, like a botanical deck. And it's not like the traditional one. So unlike the traditional ones where like if you pulled out like the death card, let's just say, it'll actually have like some sort of depiction of like a skeleton
Mm-hmm.
or the grim reaper or something like that. The death card in my is like totally different. I think it's like some sort of like poisonous plant though. But like still you could like look at those cards, and even if you're looking at the death card and you didn't know the keywords that I just read off, you could still interpret based off of the image, whether it's abstract or literal, like what comes up to you like when you look at this image. And I think sometimes I've talked to clients who are just like, yeah, when I look at this card, it makes me think of this. And granted, I don't I don't use tarot in my actual practice, but I do have some clients who talk about their use of tarot. And I also have friends who talk about their use of tarots as well. And again, like sometimes they don't know the OG, but like they'll look at a card and be like, this is what's coming to mind. And then from there, you can kind of do self-reflection, instead of just being like, oh, yeah, like what are these cards are telling the future? Even if you don't believe that, you can still be like, okay, what's comes to mind when I think about this? And like, let's self-reflect on that. So if I do look at the death card and I feel like there's something about like transformations or something about it, like what in my life do I think is transforming, if something is transforming? and or what in my life would I like to see transformed. I think you can still have like really cool conversations either for your own self-reflection and meditation, but also if clients do bring that up in the session room itself.
I can see how this is also a good way for people to express like some of their feelings too. Like when you look at a card, part of that free association too, I think it's not just going to be about like the imagery. I think it's also about like the feelings that it invokes too. Like when you talked about this death card, I I went to like lots of feelings when I even see the word death on something, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily associated with like the whatever picture that might be on there, but I think it helps me, I guess, like be in a state of like a feeling, and I think that feeling is what helps associate me to like, well, what are some of the thoughts that's associated with that feeling. And so like when we think about like transitions, I think for a lot of people that has a very similar feeling to like the death of something. Like it's an ending, it's sad. There's lots of grief around it too, and so I think that's really helpful for people to even like, I guess, like embrace and feel when there are
Mm-hmm.
things that are going on in their life and they're reflecting on it, like, oh, okay, well, this is a transition, and in some ways it does feel like a death. I do feel the grief of it, and in some ways also normalizing that like it's okay to feel that way, because we can't stop how do we
Mm-hmm.
feel, especially when like we see something that's so symbolic of something. Like the I think our brains associate the symbols with something, and the feelings that get invoked are very real, and I think those are things that we need to pay attention to instead of just brushing off the feelings or brushing off like a symbol.
Yeah, definitely. Just like with the horoscopes, there's different ways that you can like interpret things. And like, even as you said, like death, when you heard that word, like it brought up certain feelings. Though for someone else, death, that it may not be so negative. It may be like, okay, like, yeah, death is a natural part of life. And I think it's important to just like have those conversations and stuff like that. Again, I have my own tarot decks, but like I'm not using them. Like I'm expecting them to tell like the future or anything. If anything, it's just like a fun way to just be self-reflective and see what my thoughts are, like see what comes to mind. Like again, sometimes what comes to mind when I do like these free associations before I even look at the card decks, sometimes they don't align with what the original meanings is, but it could be really interesting because again, it doesn't really matter if it's upright or reverse. Sometimes people think like, oh, if it's upright it's like positive versus reverse, which is negative, which isn't true. It's just the opposite of whatever the card meaning is. But like sometimes even knowing that, I'll get like a reverse card and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a bad card, like it's reversed, like something is wrong. And like, I do that free association and I think of all the negative things and stuff like that that I'm thinking about looking at this card. And then I actually look up the meaning of the reverse card, just because I'm curious, like what is the original meaning? And it's like actually positive. Like actually I did that last night. So you can do tarot cards like different ways. Sometimes it just depends. Like sometimes there's like specific sets, things that you can do for like a whole year, things that you can do for like a month, stuff like that. I usually just do like a two pull draw. So I don't even know where I got this from. I think I just started doing that because it just felt right for me. But like essentially, I'll shuffle the cards. I'll pull the I'll pull a card from the top, and then I'll pull a card from the bottom. And like the card from the top will be like the main thing that's I'm thinking about or that I'm trying to self-reflect on. And then the second card will kind of be like the adjectives or the adverbs, like kind of explain a little bit more. So I pulled two cards yesterday. What I got was the Page of Wands reverse and also the Tower reversed as well. And it could be, and I do remember I was like, wow, I got two reverse cards. This may not be great. Especially again for the astrology girlies, like we're going through a lot of retrogrades. Mercury is in Gatorade. No, just kidding. Mercury is in Gator or retrograde. And that is not always viewed positively, though, again, just like the death card, it's not always negative. It just means that some changes are happening and it'll be changes that are not subtle at all. Yeah, so I pulled those two and I was like, oh my gosh. yes, I know that like reverse cards are not necessarily always bad, but like true reverse cards, like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? So basically, the Page of Wands reverse, the meanings could be newly formed ideas, redirecting energy. And the Tower reverse is personal transformations and averting disaster. Like, those are some of the keywords. And there were other keywords as well, but like, those are the keywords that stuck out to me. So, those are the keywords that I'm going to be reflecting on and thinking about, these newly formed ideas because there are some things I'm thinking about and some ideas that I want to implement and put into practice, not only for like this podcast, but also just for like my other like little side hustles because gotta find some way to pay the bills. But just like thinking about some of those things, and then like personal transformation and averting disaster. I especially the personal transformation. I'm thinking about like this new job that I have. I can't remember if I shared this on the podcast, but I have a new job that I'm going to start in the fall, and like I think this new job will definitely be good for me on not only like a professional level, but also on a personal level. And averting disaster, that sounds like so dramatic, but I'm also thinking about like right now, like spring semester is always hard because again, I'm tired, the students are tired, and we kind of have this like ping pong back of energy where like if they're feeling tired, I'm feeling tired, and then if I'm feeling tired, they're feeling tired, and that's unfortunately just kind of the natural being a professor during spring semester, like that burnout kind of. But like also just because of like some other things that are happening at work, I'm just feeling like I'm not getting the things that I want to get done, or at least done well. And I feel like right now that's not going to be sustainable if that continues to happen. So I feel like this new job that I'm having is going to be really great in terms of averting disaster. Again, not trying to like drag my current job or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that like just current situations, both like professionally and personally, are just not what I need to move forward in my career. And that can be true, and that can, not be a dramatic thing. Essentially, I can say this, like my current job right now, though I am doing some research, I'm not doing the amount of research that I want to. And if I try to do the amount of research that I want to at my current job, it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be quality work. It's not going to be work that I'm super excited about, and then also not able to support the students who want to do research with me in the ways that I would need to if I were to continue at my current position. So that's why this new position, I'm really excited about it because some of the responsibilities that I have in this current position aren't requirements for this new position. And therefore, I hopefully, fingers crossed, will be able to have some more time to do the research that I want to do and do it in a way that essentially I feel proud of. So, yeah. And again, like those are things where I could have focused on some of the negative things, or I could have been like, oh my gosh, this is the future. But like, again, it's more so like self reflection like, hey, how do I feel about this change that's coming up? Do I feel like this is aligning with my values, my goals, and stuff like that? And though I'm not looking forward to moving, I am overall happy about this. Like, I do feel like this is like the right decision for my career.
Yeah, and Zori, you've been talking a lot about how like the tarot cards help you to just like reflect on things that's going on. I am curious too, though, like with these tarot cards, has it ever like unlocked something for you where it's like all of a sudden something is in your awareness that you didn't realize was there, and it just like came to mind, or like it's something that you might not have been totally thinking about or knew that that feeling or that thought was there.
Actually, so one of my friends like taught me this like tarot spread that you can do at the start of the year. So it basically like does it for every month of the year. Then it also does it like the overarching theme for like I believe like spring, winter, summer, fall, that type of stuff. Again, not I'm not using it in a way to like tell the future, but it was like a fun practice to just be like, hey, If I were to do something new, if I were to like get out of my comfort zone, what would that look like? How long would that take? What would I need to do? Who would I need to like reach out to and stuff like that? What are some obstacles, both externally and also internally, that I need to consider and stuff like that? And, just like with horoscopes where they're like, yeah, March will be like, okay, so for instance, because I do follow a few horoscope stuff on Instagram. Like apparently March is going to be like, it's going to be really, how do I say this? Like a lot of change is going to happen, a lot of actions are going to happen, and especially like March for Aries, it's like, yeah, some things are going to happen. In the end, they're going to be good, but in the moment, they're going to be not good. They're going to be painful. Or you have to be careful, like Aries, you're very impulsive, so make sure that you're not being impulsive during March or whatever. And again, you know grain of salt, if nothing else, it makes me think about like, okay, what are some ways that, if so, that I'm being impulsive? What are some ways that I can do better in regards to my impulsivity, if that feels like something that aligns with me? So I don't know if it's ever been like, oh, never thought about this before, but it has been like, oh, yeah, I've been ignoring that part of things. And maybe I should be thinking about that a little bit more. Especially, so as I said, one of the like suits in the minor arcana is the coin or the pentacle, and that's usually about money. So sometimes when I get that card, I'll be like, oh, how should I be thinking about my money? Am I like investing in things? Am I spending too much? That type of thing. Sometimes it'll also be like career as well, money and career. So again, like sometimes I'm like, okay, like I know like last year, for example, you can call it my own interpretations. You could call it my own interpretation slash just so happened to be getting a lot of cards, a lot of the pentacle cards that were talking about being unsatisfied at
Mm-hmm.
work, but whatever. Something was aligning. I was like, no, this isn't something that like, oh, the cards say that I'm like unsatisfied at work, so I'm unsatisfied. Like, no, all my friends, colleagues, mentors, they knew that, something wasn't working out. Like again, I like teaching. I don't want to stop teaching, but I also really like research as well. And I wasn't able to do that as much as I want to. So like even before, like even without the cards, I didn't need the cards to say that, but like just thinking about like what comes to mind when I think of these cards or when I saw some of those cards, the free association part, and then when I, just happened to look at like what are like the original meanings of those cards as well, those did help me think about like, hey, is this something that not the cards, that I think that I can like get through and just like stay here and just like, maybe this is just like, a short time period that will get better, or do I really, really want to find a new job? The cards, again, were just like another practice of mindfulness practice in terms of things that I already knew. It's just maybe like questions. Like it gave me good prompts to think about
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how to think about that.
Right. And I like how you continue to reiterate this point that like your life isn't ruled by the cards and it's not ruled by your signs, because I think sometimes like I notice myself as a therapist having a negative reaction when clients bring up their signs as almost like an excuse for why they're doing what they're doing or why they're thinking the way that they're thinking, as if they have like no control or no autonomy in that. And I think that's where, according to what you've been talking about, I think like missing the point of you talking about like your horoscope or talking about like your tarot cards, because I think instead of it being like freeing and allowing you to be self-reflective and thoughtful, it almost feels like you're caged up in an idea, or it's a very like rigid way of looking at things so that you don't have to think harder about something. And I think that's a pitfall of maybe not using this in an effective way for people when they're using this as something that's just like very rigid, very much like this is what's going to happen in my life. And I think like, you know, we seek assurance in some ways that like
Hmm.
I can imagine people going tarot cards. It's like, oh, if I just look at the cards, it's going to be what's happening in my life. It's very rigid. I know what to expect. I know how to handle it. But I
Hmm.
think that takes away from the aspect of like, well, what do you have control over? How do we change
Hmm.
things or how do we affect our lives so that, you know, we could reflect more about like, what is this card trying to tell us? Um, and so, like, I think that's something to be very conscious of. Like, how do we continue to let these things be empowering for our clients and not let it be the thing that like hinders them or stops them from being more open-minded or more expansive about themselves and how they move and navigate through the world.
Yeah. As you were talking, it kind of reminds me, again, this isn't like a perfect one-to-one, but it does kind of remind me of clients who use their diagnosis as a reason why, growth is not happening or why they're not reaching their goals. Like, obviously with diagnosis that is different, that's serious, then that has a lot of elements that actually do stop people from reaching their goals. But, I'm talking about the clients who just like, oh, because of this, I can never, realistically move forward past this point. And we know that, especially with some of the diagnosis, like, yes, there are some boundaries, there are some limitations in regards to things, but let's say ADHD. Like, I've had students who are just like, I have ADHD and therefore I'm never going to be a good student. And I'm just like, is that the diagnosis that is making you an average student, or because you're just, not allowing yourself to explore further past that? And again, I know this is not a perfect one for one, so please don't come for me. But like, that's just what comes to mind. Where it's just like, okay, if you're just stopping at this label, this term, then yeah, there's not a lot of growth. But if you actually, how does this apply to me specifically? And what does this mean for me? What does this mean for like how I view things and how I think about things? Then I think that is a place where you can grow. But if you just stop at like, oh, Natalie's a Aquarius, or Zori's a Aries, then yeah, you're not gonna you're not gonna go deep. And I can understand how some therapists would kind of turn their nose up at that or kind of just be like, okay, moving forward, but I think just like how we talked about like video games, like it could be so easy to just like move past like, okay, you like Minecraft, but let's talk about like this other thing that's happening in your life that's whatever. You know, Sometimes not even asking about that Minecraft or about like whatever video games that our clients are interested in, that could be a point where we could have gained a lot of really crucial information, a lot of really crucial understanding of who our client is. But because we had our own stereotypes about it, we missed that. And that could be a really crucial key to understanding our client, what they're going through. So I just like to tell my students, like, yeah, it may seem a little woo-woo, like, also like crystals. I'm not even gonna get into crystals because that could take forever. But like crystals, like, I have some clients who are interested in crystals and like some people in my life who are interested in crystals. I like crystals, but mostly because they're shiny. But like, if you just stop at like, oh, okay, yeah, you got a rose quartz, cool, and not ask like, what does rose quartz mean? And I'm just using that because thankfully rose quartz is the only one that I can remember for sure. But like rose quartz, one of the like traits or like powers of it is like self-love. And that could be something depending on what your client's presenting problem is, like something that you may want to explore. Like, okay, like, do you feel like you have, like, if you are surrounded by all these rose quartz, do you feel like you have self-love? What does self-love look like for you? Or if you don't have it, what do you need for that? And again, those are like, these are tools, these are prompts. These are not necessarily the end all be all, but they can be like a bridge to working with our clients, or just to even not even with clients, but just, people in our lives, you can ask like, okay, yeah, what does how does rose quartz help you, or those type of things. So
Hmm.
I like to have these conversations because just like with a lot of things that we talk about, it can be really easy for people in the mental health field to be like, okay, that's not scientifically backed, but like still there's still a way, just like with anything, like with comic books, with video games, with movies, TV shows, K-pop bands, where you can still like use it as a tool to understand clients, understand other people, and not just like stay on the surface level with things.
Right. And when we remove the biases from, the things that our clients talk about, I think it's really helpful for us to understand them better because we're no longer operating from like our own lens, we're operating from like their lens too. And so I think there's like a humility in that too, trying to understand the way that they see the world. Because people like things for a reason, right? It's meaningful in some ways. And I think that's always something that's going to be worth talking to clients about because if they're so into something, I need to understand like why are they so into it? Because that's an important big part of their life, right? They're not just going to
Hmm.
drop that like, oh yeah, I'm an Aquarius and, this is the thing like I read my horoscope today and I'm not just gonna roll my eyes and be like okay, but like if they had put in the time and energy to do this thing or to research it or to understand it or invest their time and energy into it, um, it's something that's worth talking about, right? Because they find value in it. And so I think this is like I think when we talk about some of these things too, we we are also talking about like a cultural humility kind of idea too. Like there's a culture around these things, which is why like
Hmm.
we love talking about geeky things because that's clearly like a culture around it. Even in like the
Hmm.
horoscope and the tarot realm, like there's a culture around it. And so like we need to approach it from that lens of like cultural humility for us to try to understand the culture that this person is in and why it's meaningful. And I think we learn so much about our clients and how to help them that way.
Hmm. Exactly. So yeah, you got to know a little bit about Natalie and I. I think it'll be cool. So, like, if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, or if you see any posts about this episode on social media, drop your horoscopes and let us know if you align with the traits or not. I think that would be cool. But yeah. Thank you all so much for joining us for another episode of Therapy on a Tangent. If you like what you listened to today, please remember on Spotify and or Apple Podcasts to give us a rating and review. And if you're listening on YouTube, to like, subscribe, and hit that bell button so you'll be notified of the next episode. And if there's a topic you would like to hear about in the future, either put it in the comments or email us at therapyonaTangentPod@gmail.com. Again, that's therapyonaTangentPod@gmail.com. And yeah, that's it, folks. So I'm Zori.
I'm Natalie.
And until next time, stay on a tangent. Bye.
Bye.